The book that should not be read. A student discovers a mysterious book in an abandoned library. Each page reveals stories about her own life, but written in the future. Now, she must decide whether to continue reading and face the dark fate or try to change the course of history. The school library always had an air of mystery for me. Since I was little, I viewed it as a magical place where knowledge and imagination intertwine. However, that autumn afternoon, when I decided to explore the dusty corridors of the old library, I never imagined I would find something that would change my life forever. As I pushed open the creaky door, the smell of aged paper enveloped me, almost as if the very air was infused with the stories that resided there. The shelves were lined up and covered with a fine layer of dust, as if time had chosen to ignore that space. My footsteps echoed in the silence, and I couldn't help but feel a chill run down my spine at the thought of the number of secrets those books held. "Where is everyone?" I murmured to myself. It was a weekday, and most students were in class, but the library seemed to have a life of its own, as if waiting for someone willing to uncover its mysteries. As I walked, my fingers glided over the spines of the books, reading the worn titles. Classics of literature, forgotten romances, and even some reference books that seemed to have been abandoned for decades. But something caught my attention. At the back of the shelf, almost hidden by dust, there was a book that looked different. It was bound in dark leather, with an irregular texture and a title that was nearly faded. "The book that should not be read," the inscription said, in golden letters that gleamed enigmatically. Curiosity consumed me. I looked around, as if expecting someone to tell me not to touch that object. But instead, an uncontrollable impulse took over me. I pulled it from the shelf, and as I did, a cloud of dust rose up, making me sneeze. "Ugh, gross," I grumbled while wiping my hand on my shirt. But the excitement of finding something so peculiar outweighed my disgust. I sat down at one of the worn tables in the library and opened the book. The pages were yellowed and seemed fragile, as if any sudden movement could tear them. The first story I read was about a young girl named Clara, who lived in a small town very much like mine. This is strange, I thought, absorbing every word. Clara's descriptions of her life, her insecurities, and her dreams reflected so much of me that I could almost feel her presence. "It's like I'm reading about my own life," I murmured aloud, drawing curious glances from some passing students. But I didn't care. I was completely immersed in reading. As I progressed through the pages, the words seemed to come alive, and everything around me faded away. I was transported into the story, feeling Clara's emotions as if they were my own. Until I reached a part that froze my blood. Clara was about to suffer a bicycle accident, and the description alarmingly resembled a situation my younger brother, Ethan, had recently faced. "No, this can't be real," I thought, as a chill ran up my spine. "It's just a story. It can't happen to me." I closed the book abruptly, my heart racing uncontrollably. The idea that something so horrible could happen to Ethan paralyzed me. "Calm down, Emily," I told myself, trying to control the anxiety swelling within me. "This is just fiction. Just an old book." But even as I spoke, the unease settled in my chest like a shadow that wouldn't leave me alone. I looked at the book in my hands, and the cover seemed to glow with its own light, as if trying to draw me back in. "What are you trying to tell me?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The library remained silent, but I felt as if everything around me was paying attention, as if the walls were filled with secrets. I took a deep breath, and despite the fear that gripped me, curiosity pulled me back in. I need to know more, I thought. But at the same time, a part of me screamed, "Don't do it, Emily. You can't open that door." My hands trembled as I reopened the book, reluctant but unable to resist its allure. The next story I read was even more unsettling. It described a relationship between two friends, where one betrayed the trust of the other. The despair and pain the character felt were palpable, and I couldn't help but think of Sophie, my best friend. The idea that something like that could happen between us was unbearable. This is just fiction, I repeated in my mind, but the words of the story echoed like a warning. I need to talk to Sophie, I declared aloud, but the thought of confronting her about what I knew made me anxious. What would I say? Hey, Sophie, I read a book that says you're going to betray me. It sounded absurd, but the unease in my heart wouldn't let me rest. The truth was, I feared that this story could become reality. I stood up and closed the book, determined to leave. But before I left, I couldn't help but take one last look at the dusty volume. Why did you present yourself to me? I asked, but of course, there was no answer. With one last reluctant glance, I left the library, the unease following me. As I walked home, the words and images from the book danced in my mind. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, but the beauty of the scene was overshadowed by the anxiety consuming me. Ethan needs to be careful, I thought, remembering what I had read. How could I warn him without sounding crazy? I arrived home to find Ethan playing in the yard, his laughter echoing in the cool afternoon air. He was on his bike, pedaling in circles, and a smile spread across my face at the sight of him so happy. But the image I had read, of an accident that could change everything, settled in my mind like a shadow. Hey, Ethan, watch your speed. I shouted, trying to sound casual, but my heart was tight. He looked at me, laughing. Calm down, Emily. I'm a pro, he replied, before speeding up even more, defying gravity. Each of his movements seemed riskier than the last, and my stomach twisted with worry. What if that really happens? I thought, the idea making me tremble. Why don't you come ride with me? Ethan called, but I hesitated. No, I'm busy. In truth, I was paralyzed by fear. With one last look at him, I went back inside, my mind filled with questions and uncertainties. The book had given me a chilling glimpse of the future, and I didn't know how to cope with it. This can't be real, I repeated to myself, but the truth was, deep down, I knew something was changing within me. The stories from the book were beginning to intertwine with my reality, and I wasn't sure how to escape this impending nightmare. The school library always had a certain air of mystery for me. With its tall, dusty shelves, it was a refuge from curious glances and the noisy conversations in the corridors. When I entered that day, the smell of aged paper and dust enveloped me like a hug. I had lost myself in my own mind, seeking a bit of peace before the next class. As I walked among the shelves, my fingers glided over the spines of the books, almost as if I were searching for something I didn't yet know I needed. That's when I saw it. A book that seemed to have been forgotten by time, tucked away on a shelf in the back. The cover was worn, with golden letters that no longer shone, and a title I could barely read. I felt a wave of curiosity wash over me. What could those dusty pages contain? The book that should not be read, I read aloud, almost sounding like a warning. As soon as I opened it, a cloud of dust rose up, making me sneeze. Hashtag, but what I saw in the first few pages took my breath away. The stories were strange yet so familiar. They spoke of a lonely, introspective young student who spent hours in a library, just like me. I couldn't believe the coincidence. Phrases about friendship, betrayal, and fear unfolded before my eyes, and a sense of discomfort began to settle in my stomach. When I reached the part that described an accident involving a brother, my heart raced. Ethan, I thought, remembering him, my younger brother, who was always nearby, playing and exploring the world with his innocence. A vivid description of a runaway bicycle, a piercing scream in the air. I abruptly closed the book, a chill running down my spine as I hesitated. What was that? A warning? A prediction? The desire to know more was strong, but so was the fear. I decided I needed to vent. During the next break, I sought out Sophie. She was my best friend, the only one who could understand my anxieties. We sat in a corner of the cafeteria, where other students laughed and chatted, oblivious to what I was about to reveal. Sophie's gaze was curious, but I hesitated to speak. How could I explain that a book had left me so disturbed? "Hey, Emily, what happened? You look strange," Sophie commented, leaning in closer. "I found a book in the library," I started, but the words didn't come easily. "It's different." "Different how?" she asked, her expression a mix of concern and interest. "It has stories about things that are happening and that could happen," I replied, feeling the weight of my confession. "Like someone is writing our lives." Sophie raised an eyebrow, intrigued but somewhat skeptical. "That sounds a bit crazy, Emily. Are you saying someone's life is being written in a book?" "It's not exactly that. It's more like the stories are premonitions," I said, looking around to make sure no one was listening. "It talks about me, about you, about Ethan. One thing I read, an accident with a bicycle." Sophie's expression changed immediately. "With Ethan? What do you mean by that?" "I don't know," I exclaimed, feeling panic rise. "I just read it and it scared me. I can't stop thinking about it." Sophie fell silent, her eyes fixed on me as if she were trying to grasp the gravity of the situation. "You need to tell someone, Emily. What if it's true? What if something happens to Ethan? That's what I fear," I said, almost in a whisper. "But what if I'm wrong? What if I'm just imagining things?" Sophie took a deep breath, trying to calm me. "Look, maybe you should talk to him. See how he is. Sometimes it's better to investigate than to think the worst." I agreed, but the idea of facing the situation made me uneasy. Meanwhile, our conversation drifted to other topics, but the worry never left my mind. After lunch, I decided to go home early. When I arrived, I found Ethan in the garage, playing with his bicycle. My heart raced at the sight of him so happy, but the image of what I had read echoed in my head. "Hey, Emily!" he shouted, waving at me with a wide smile. "Look how fast I am. Ethan, be careful." I shouted, realizing he was about to go down a steep hill. A chill ran through my body. What was going through my mind was a mix of fear and desperation. "Relax, it's just a hill," he replied, laughing, and my anxiety only increased. "But what if you fall?" I asked, trying to hide the panic in my voice. "I know what I'm doing." He leaned forward and began to descend. My heart was in my throat. I didn't know whether to scream, run, or just stand still. The sight was terrifying. He accelerated, and fear paralyzed me. I remembered what I had read, the description of the accident. The image from the book overlaid with reality, and the feeling of helplessness consumed me. When he finally stopped, immense relief washed over me. "See? I told you it was easy," he exclaimed, all excited. "You're so reckless, Ethan," I said, trying to disguise my relief. "You could have hurt yourself." "But I didn't, did I?" He smiled, and all I could think about was how fragile the line was between happiness and tragedy. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't sleep. The stories from the book still echoed in my mind, and the idea that what was written could actually come true terrified me. What should I do? Should I ignore it all or try to alert someone? The doubt consumed me, and the uncertainty grew increasingly oppressive. The next day came, and I went to school with the feeling that something was about to happen. The atmosphere was charged with tension. I went to the library again, but I couldn't focus. The pages of the book burned in my mind, and the disturbing revelations seemed to intensify. During the break, I looked for Sophie again, but this time her gaze was distant. She was talking to a group of friends, and I felt out of place. The weight of what I knew felt like a burden I couldn't share. Meanwhile, a rumor began circulating around the school about Ethan. Something about an accident that a friend of his had suffered during a bike competition. My heart raced. What did that mean? Was it what I had read? Sophie approached, and I noticed she was worried. "Did you hear what happened to Ethan's friend? He fell off his bike and broke his arm." I heard," I murmured, fear suffocating me. "It's all so strange, doesn't it seem?" "Strange?" Sophie repeated, looking at me with a mix of concern and confusion. "You're really scared about this, aren't you?" "I don't know how to explain it, but I feel like this has to do with the book," I said, feeling the urgency rise. "Sophie, I need to talk to Ethan. I need to know if he's okay." "Let's go find him," she replied, and we quickly headed to the sports field, where he usually spent time with his friends. With each step, the weight of uncertainty grew. What was I going to say to him? How could I explain that a book had left me so anxious? When we found Ethan, he was surrounded by friends, laughing and playing. A part of me felt relieved to see him so well, but another part was still in a panic. I needed to know if he was aware of the danger. "Ethan." I called, and he turned, a smile lighting up his face. "Hey, Emily." He replied, and his cheerful expression made me feel a bit better. "Are you okay?" I asked, somewhat hesitantly. "Of course." "Why?" He replied, surprised. "Just. I heard some things," I murmured, trying not to sound too worried. "Something happened to a friend of yours, and I just wanted to make sure you're being careful." He laughed. "Relax, I always take care. I'm not stupid, you know." But as he spoke, a wave of insecurity washed over me. What if he didn't know? Sitting on my bed, the dusty book lay beside me, like a monolith of mysteries and revelations. The smell of aged paper was still fresh in my mind, and every word I read seemed to echo in my consciousness. I couldn't stop thinking about what I had discovered so far, about how those stories intertwined with my life in a terrifying way. What I feared most was that with each page I turned, I was somehow tracing a fate that couldn't be undone. That night, my mind was restless, and I couldn't help but wonder, how far could this reading lead me? With every new story I absorbed, a new layer of concern was added to those already dwelling in my being. The image of my mom, when she realized she was about to leave the house, flickered in my mind. What would she think of all this? I couldn't let her know, not yet. Then a thought hit me like a bolt of lightning, the story of a character who sacrificed everything for a friend. It was a simple narrative, but the depth of the sacrifice left me in shock. The character faced pain, disdain, and even betrayal in the name of friendship. At that moment, I found myself reflecting on my own life and what I was willing to sacrifice for Sophie, my best friend. The idea that I might have to choose between protecting our friendship or the truth was almost unbearable. "Emily." Sophie's voice pulled me from my reverie. She was standing in the doorway of my room, a smile on her face and the afternoon light illuminating her features. "You won't believe what happened today at school." "Hey, Sophie." I replied, trying to force a smile. "What happened?" She entered and flopped onto my bed, her blonde hair spilling over the pillow. "Do you remember Lucas, that guy from the football team? He tried to crack a joke at Max's expense, but it went so badly that everyone was left unsure whether to laugh or cry. It was hilarious." Her laughter was contagious, but I couldn't join in. The memory of what I had read about Sophie's impending betrayal loomed over me like a shadow. "Yeah, sounds funny," I murmured, looking away. "You're not okay, are you?" Sophie tilted her head, her blue eyes fixed on me. "You seem distant." "I'm just thinking about some things," I replied, trying to avoid the conversation. I didn't want to burden her with my anxiety. "Not now." "About the book?" Sophie asked, raising an eyebrow. "Are you still on that mysterious book? What's so special about it?" It's just a story, Sophie. One of those stories that makes you think. You know how it is, right?" I couldn't let her know that the stories reflected reality. I see." But you know I'm always here to listen, right? Sometimes, we just need to vent, Sophie said, her tone filled with concern. Then, an idea struck me. I could try to divert her attention, change the subject. Did you see the new horror movie that came out? I heard it's super scary. Sophie smiled, but there was a glimmer in her eyes that revealed she was still worried. I did. Let's watch it together next weekend. It'll be fun. Of course. That sounds great, I replied, but the truth was, inside, I felt like a tangle of emotions. And as we talked, I couldn't shake the thought that the book was infiltrating our lives in a way I didn't know if I could control. After Sophie left, restlessness consumed me. The image of Ethan, my younger brother, popped into my mind. I couldn't ignore the feeling that something was about to happen. I remembered what I had read about an accident involving bicycles. The chill I felt when I closed the book was now a reality that consumed me. I got up from my bed and walked to the window. Night had fallen, and the city seemed peaceful, but my inner turmoil wouldn't let me be. I needed to check if Ethan was okay. He had left home a few hours earlier, and the last thing I wanted was for what I read to become reality. I quickly descended the stairs, looking for my mom, but the house was silent. Mom? I called, but received no answer. I grabbed my jacket and headed out, determined to find Ethan. The night was cold, and the streetlights cast long, distorted shadows. I walked quickly to the park, where I knew he often rode his bike. The sight of the empty space made me even more anxious. Where could he be? In the distance, I heard laughter. I followed the sound until I found a group of kids, including Ethan, doing tricks on their bikes. I felt relief wash over me, but a cloud of concern still hung over me. Hey, Ethan! I shouted, and he turned, his radiant smile lighting up his face. What are you doing out here so late? Just having fun. Look, check out what I learned. He started pedaling quickly, making a sharp turn. My heart raced. What was he doing? He had no idea of the danger. Stop, wait a second. I yelled, but he was already far away. In the back of my mind, I saw the scene of the accident unfolding, and a wave of dread engulfed me. Ethan, be careful. But he didn't seem to hear. He was so excited, and the group of friends was cheering him on. I yelled again, but adrenaline seemed to have taken over his attention. I had to do something. I ran toward him. Ethan! Stop right now. He looked at me, and for a brief moment, the smile on his face vanished. What's wrong, Emily? I'm fine. But as he spoke, something happened. One of his friends, distracted, didn't see Ethan approaching, and in the blink of an eye, a collision occurred. The screams echoed in the night, and I froze, paralyzed as fear took hold of me. Ethan! I shouted, my heart shattering as I ran toward them. The scene was chaotic. The kid who had collided with Ethan was on the ground, clutching his arm, while Ethan stood dazed, looking at his friend. Is everything okay? I asked, breathless, kneeling beside them. I think I broke my arm, the boy said, pain evident on his face. We need to call for help. I looked at Ethan, who was in shock. Are you okay? Did you get hurt? I don't know. I just wanted to show the trick, he murmured, and guilt began to settle in his eyes. You can't play like that, Ethan. It can be dangerous. I was panicking, but also filled with worry. What was the book doing to me? I couldn't let this become reality. Soon, the sound of sirens began to wail in the distance, and the reality of what had happened started to sink in. As we waited for the ambulance, I wondered if I could change what was written in the pages of the book. The idea that the stories I read could have real power over us put me on high alert. What else could I discover? What else should I do? As the chaos unfolded around me, one thing became clear: I needed to understand better what was happening. And above all, I needed to know if I could protect the people I loved. The musty smell of aged paper and dust filled the air of my school's forgotten library. After discovering that enigmatic book, I couldn't stop thinking about it. With every page I turned, a new layer of my life was revealed, and I couldn't ignore the feeling that I was about to uncover something much bigger than myself. Sitting at the table beneath the window, with the sunlight filtering through the worn curtains, I opened the book again. My heart raced, and anticipation wrapped around me like a fog. The first story I read had intrigued me, but now I wanted more. With each page I turned, my anxiety grew, as if an invisible force was pulling me deeper into that narrative. What will the next secret this book reveals be? I murmured to myself, my fingertips brushing against the worn spine. I was immersed in a new passage when I realized that the story was about a group of friends facing dilemmas similar to mine. The description of an impending betrayal was so vivid that I could almost feel the protagonist's pain. "Emily, are you okay?" Sophie's voice sliced through the quiet air of the library. I looked up to see her standing in the doorway, a look of concern on her face. "I'm fine. Just reading an old book," I replied, trying to hide the unease that consumed me. I didn't want to worry Sophie with the secrets that book held. What I had read so far was a burden I didn't know how to share. "It looks like you're paler than usual. Did something happen?" she pressed, walking closer to me. Her curious eyes sparkled, and I knew that if I didn't change the subject quickly, she would insist on knowing more. "It's just the dust in here," I lied, forcing a smile. "You know how dusty libraries can be." Sophie didn't seem convinced, but she dropped the subject. "I need to tell you something. I heard a rumor about Ethan." She leaned in closer, as if the topic was extremely confidential. "They say he's planning something risky with his friends, something involving bikes. Hashtag, 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 I'm worried." A chill ran down my spine. I knew that the book had already revealed an accident involving my brother, and now this new information felt like a clear sign that I needed to act. "What exactly did you hear?" I asked, trying to control the anxiety in my voice. "Just that he's trying to do a new trick that's super dangerous. You know how he is, he can't stay away from an adventure," Sophie said, shaking her head disapprovingly. "Okay, I'll talk to him," I replied, but in reality, I was terrified. What could I do? The book had already shown me what could happen, and now everything was intertwining in a way that I couldn't comprehend. After Sophie left, my mind was overloaded. I decided I needed to go home and find Ethan before it was too late. The library felt like a dark maze as I exited, the shadows dancing on the walls as if the book was trying to warn me about the urgency of the situation. When I got home, I found Ethan on the sidewalk, surrounded by a group of friends. They were laughing, but the sight of them juggling their bikes made my stomach knot. "Ethan!" I shouted, running toward him. "What are you doing?" He turned, a wide smile on his face. "Hey, Emily. Look, I'm going to try this." He pointed to an improvised ramp made of wooden planks. My heart raced. "You shouldn't be doing that. It's dangerous." "Did you hear what Sophie said?" I insisted, trying to remain calm, but concern leaked through my voice. "Oh, come on, you're overreacting." "It's just a little trick," he replied as he prepared to mount his bike. "Ethan, please. I'm really worried." I pleaded, recalling the scene I had read in the book. I couldn't let this become reality. He hesitated, and I saw the confusion in his eyes. "It's all under control, Em. I always do this. Trust me." That word, trust, echoed in my mind. The book had taught me that even the smallest choices could have devastating consequences. "Ethan, I trust you, but this isn't safe. You could get hurt. You're being way too protective. I'm older, I can take care of myself." He climbed onto his bike, and a wave of despair washed over me. Please, just get down. If something happens, I don't know what I would do, I said, my voice trembling. He looked at me for a moment and finally got off the bike. All right. I'm not going to do anything now. But you need to relax, Em. It's not like the world is about to end, Ethan said, trying to calm the situation. But the truth was, I felt like the world was crumbling around me. The book was showing me a truth I didn't want to accept, and everything was connecting in a way that terrified me. After that tense moment, I returned to my room and flopped onto my bed. I picked up the book once more and started flipping through its pages. My hands trembled as I tried to find answers to the questions that tormented me. What was this book? Why did its stories reflect my life? Then I found a passage that caught my attention. The reading of this book can alter destiny. The reader has the power to change what is written. What did that mean? I couldn't understand. The book could be a tool for change, but how could I use it without creating more chaos? What do you want from me? I whispered, looking at the worn cover. How can I change what's written? Nothing happened, and I felt alone. The weight of the revelations began to suffocate me. I looked in the mirror and saw a version of myself that was slipping away. The stories in the book began to change my perception of myself and those around me. I was becoming a version of myself that I didn't recognize. That night, I couldn't sleep. The words of the book reverberated in my mind, and I didn't know if I should take what was written seriously. What would happen if I tried to change what was already determined? And what if I couldn't? The next day, I returned to the library in search of more answers. I needed to understand the story behind the book, what lay within its pages. The dusty shelves seemed to watch me as I walked among them. If you don't help me, I don't know what I will do, I murmured to the book as if it could hear my thoughts. In the non-fiction section, I found a book about the history of the library and the authors who had passed through. Flipping through the yellowed pages, my eyes landed on a mention of an unknown author who had mysteriously disappeared. He wrote a book that was lost to time, but rumors say his stories were more than just fiction, the text read. My heart raced. This author could be the key to understanding what I was facing. As soon as I finished reading, I searched for more information, but little was known about the author. He had become a legend, and his stories, a mystery. Why did you disappear? What did you do? I murmured, feeling curiosity consume me. The idea that the author might have lost himself in his own stories unsettled me. What did that mean for me? Was I getting lost too? I sat down again at the table by the window, unsure of how to proceed. The book was showing me that the stories weren't just about what was written, but about what I could do from them. And that made me even more anxious. Then a passage caught my eye. When the reader confronts the truth, they must be prepared to accept the consequences. The words echoed like a warning. I was about to face a truth that could change everything, and the thought of confronting that truth terrified me. Just one more page, I thought. But as I turned the leaf, I found a blank passage. My eyes widened. What did that mean? The power to change destiny was in my hands. What do you mean? I asked aloud, looking around the empty library. What do I do now? The answers didn't come, but a certainty began to form within me. I needed to act, I needed to confront what was written, but I remembered the day I found the book as if it were yesterday. The dust covering its pages seemed to reflect the shadows inhabiting my mind. But now, after reading its disturbing pages, I was immersed in a sea of uncertainties and fears. What was I supposed to do with what I had discovered? Sophie's betrayal, the impending accident with Ethan, everything seemed to be unraveling in a tangle of interconnected destinies. That afternoon, as the sun set, casting oranges and golds through my bedroom window, I felt paralyzed. The book's revelations still echoed in my mind. My heart raced at the memory of the conversation I had with Sophie earlier. I knew I needed to confront her, but the thought of risking our friendship made me apprehensive. The weight of the information I carried was unbearable. I descended the stairs, trying to organize my thoughts. The living room was silent except for the soft sound of the television on in the background. "Mom." I called, but received no answer. I needed a moment alone, a space to breathe before facing Sophie. I grabbed my phone and decided to send a message. "Hey, Sophie. Can we talk later?" I waited anxiously for a response, but frustration soon turned to anxiety when I saw she was online but didn't reply. I looked out the window and saw Ethan riding his bike on the sidewalk. A chill ran down my spine. The book hadn't lied. The accident was coming, and I didn't know how to prevent it. I then decided I needed to take action. I grabbed my backpack and left the house, heading to the park where we used to meet. The evening lights illuminated the path, but my heart was heavy. With each step, I questioned whether I should tell Sophie everything I had read or if that would only drive her further away. "Hey, Emily!" Sophie exclaimed when she saw me. She wore that bright smile that always made me feel like everything would be okay. But in that moment, I wasn't so sure. "Hey, Sophie. We need to talk." ####. She sensed that something was wrong, and her expression changed. "About what? You seem different." I hesitated. The memory of the book's words still echoed in my mind. "It's about what I read." "This again?" She grimaced. "You shouldn't have read that book. It's just fiction." "But what if it's not? What if there's some truth in the stories?" She crossed her arms, looking at me with suspicion. "You're worrying me. What did you read that's so important?" I took a deep breath, trying to find the words. "I read about an accident that could happen to Ethan." Sophie's face paled. "What? How do you know that?" "It's complicated. The book, it's not normal. The stories are about us. About what could happen." Sophie shook her head, clearly agitated. "Emily, you can't believe everything you read. You're being paranoid." "Paranoid?" "Sophie, I saw you and a group of students planning something against a classmate. What if it's true? What if what I read about Ethan's accident happens?" She fell silent for a moment, processing what I had said. "You're accusing me of things I didn't do. I would never hurt anyone." "I'm not saying that. I'm just trying to understand what's going on. We need to protect ourselves, Sophie." "Protect ourselves from what?" "From what you read in a book. That doesn't make sense." The tension between us was rising, and I could feel my heart racing. "I just want you to believe me. This isn't just a story. It's like someone is watching us. If I don't do anything, and something happens to Ethan, Emily, you're blowing everything out of proportion. You need to stop this. Let's put the book and this paranoia aside and just live our lives." I didn't know what to do. Her gaze was filled with frustration, and my certainty began to waver. What should I do? I knew something was wrong, but Sophie seemed so distant, so blind to what was about to happen. "Look, I'm leaving. I need to think," I said, turning my back. The walk home was a mix of anger and confusion. What could I do to save Ethan? Or even to save my friendship with Sophie? When I got home, I went straight to my room, sitting on the bed with my head full of chaotic thoughts. The vision of Ethan on his bike was still fresh in my mind. He looked so carefree, so innocent. The book had shown me what could happen, and I couldn't let it come true. I grabbed my phone and called Ethan. He answered quickly. "Hey, sis. What's up? What are you doing right now?" My voice came out tenser than I intended. "I'm just riding my bike." "Why? Come home. Please." "Why? Everything's fine. I'm having fun." "Ethan, just trust me. I need you to come home now." He hesitated, and I could hear the sound of his bike stopping. "Is everything okay? You sound nervous. Just come, please." Finally, he agreed. "Okay, I'm on my way. What's going on?" "I'll tell you when you get here," I said, feeling the weight of guilt crush me. I didn't want to alarm him, but I needed to protect him at all costs. When he arrived, his expression was filled with concern. "What happened, Emily? We need to talk." He sat down on the bed next to me, his eyes curious. "About what? You're scaring me." I found a book at the library. And it talks about things that could happen. Things about you, about me, about Sophie. Ethan frowned. "What are you saying? It's just a book, right? You can't believe that." "I know, but what if there's truth in what's written? What I read could affect what happens." "That's crazy. You're letting this get to you. We can't change what's written." "But what if we can? What if I can change what's going to happen?" "You don't understand. The book said you could get hurt." He fell silent, processing my words. The expression on his face shifted from confusion to concern. "What do you want me to do?" "Stay close to me. Don't leave the house. Don't ride your bike, don't go out with friends. I can't lose you, Ethan." He looked at me, his eyes full of understanding. "I won't do anything without you. But this can't be real, right?" "I don't know. But I need you to trust me." The tension inside me grew, and the uncertainty felt like a weight on my shoulders. I felt isolated, as if I were carrying a burden that no one else understood. My friendship with Sophie was crumbling, and now I was putting a barrier between myself and Ethan, trying to protect him from something that maybe couldn't be avoided. The rest of the night passed in silence. My thoughts flickered between the stories I had read and the faces of those I loved. The fear of losing Ethan mingled with the frustration of not being able to make Sophie believe me. I was trapped in a cycle of despair and loneliness, and the truth was I didn't know how to escape. As the night wore on, I looked at the book still sitting on the shelf, calling to me like a distant echo. I knew the road ahead was filled with difficult decisions, and the only thing I could do was prepare for what was to come. The fate was at stake, and I needed to be strong enough to face it, not just for myself, but for those I loved. The morning breeze flowed through my window, bringing with it the smell of wet earth and blooming flowers of spring. I was sitting at the kitchen table, trying to focus on the book that had consumed me for the past few days, but my mind wandered to the revelations it had brought. Sophie's betrayal, the impending accident with Ethan, all of it left me restless. After so many days dealing with the consequences of reading that cursed book, an idea formed in my mind. I needed to discover more about its origin. I couldn't let destiny rest in the hands of a story written by an unknown author. After a hasty breakfast, I went to Ethan's room, where he was still asleep. The sunlight gently illuminated his face, and I hesitated for a moment, but soon urgency took over. I knocked softly on the door. "Ethan, wake up. We have to go." "Just 5 more minutes, please," he mumbled, pulling the blanket up. "No way. It's important. We need to find out the truth about that book," I said, trying to convey urgency in my voice. He stretched and finally got up. Okay. What did you find this time?" "A diary. I think it might have belonged to the author." The idea of sharing this discovery excited me. Ethan had always been more pragmatic, so I knew he would be intrigued. After getting ready quickly, we met Sophie outside of school. She looked worried, as if she could sense the tension in the air. "Hey, Sophie. Are you ready for our little adventure?" I asked, trying to lighten the mood. "Yeah, but what exactly are we looking for?" she replied, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "The origin of the book, maybe something that can help us understand what's going on," I said. "I found a diary that might have belonged to the author. We need to go to the old bookstore in town." Sophie frowned. Old bookstore. The one people say is filled with forgotten stories. Exactly. You're going to love it, Ethan said, trying to cheer her up. The bookstore was a few blocks from school, and the walk there felt endless. As soon as we arrived, the old wooden door creaked open, revealing a shadowy atmosphere filled with the scents of aged paper. Tall shelves, crammed with dusty books, lined the walls. Light filtered through the dusty windows, creating an almost magical ambience. "This is different," Sophie commented, looking around with a mix of fascination and apprehension. "Let's look for something that can help us," I said, feeling adrenaline coursing through my veins. "There must be clues here." We split up, and as I walked between the shelves, my fingers glided over the spines of the books. Hashtag, hashtag, hashtag. Every title seemed to whisper secrets, but anxiety consumed me. Where could the diary be? "Hey, Emily!" Ethan called from across the store. "Look at this." I ran over to him and found him holding an old book. The cover was worn, but there was something familiar about it. "What did you find?" "It's a memoir by a local author. He wrote a lot about his life and experiences," he said, opening a yellowed page. "Look, he mentioned something about a ritual that can alter stories." Sophie approached, her eyes shining with curiosity. "A ritual? What else does it say?" Ethan read aloud. "The accounts told that stories have the power to change reality, but only if the storyteller has the courage to face them." He paused and looked at us. "This might be what we need." I felt torn. The idea of performing a ritual seemed risky, but at the same time, a spark of hope ignited within me. "We need to know more. Let's keep looking." We delved deeper into the bookstore, rifling through shelves and racks. With every book I opened, anticipation grew. Finally, in a dark corner, I found a small wooden box. My heart raced as I opened it, and there it was, a diary, surrounded by dust. "Sophie, Ethan. Come here." I called, my voice trembling with emotion. They rushed to my side, and together we began to leaf through the diary. The pages were filled with notes, scribbles, and drawings. It was as if the author had recorded every thought and idea that crossed his mind. "Look, here," I said, pointing to a passage that talked about feeling lost in his own stories. He talks about the pressure of creating something that could impact others. It seems he was battling his own demons. "That's heartbreaking," Sophie murmured, looking at the words as if she were reading her own story. "And this explains how an author could disappear. He got lost in his own narrative." Ethan shook his head. "But look at this," he said, turning the page. The diary contained a reference to a ritual that could alter what was written. "If we do this, maybe we can change things before they happen." I examined the passage, my mind spinning with possibilities. But, would this really work? What if we don't do it right? We have to try. We can't let things go the way the book indicates, Ethan insisted, determination in his voice. "I agree," Sophie said, her voice steady. "But we need to plan. We can't just do this blindly." After that discussion, we decided to meet at my house that night to go over the details of the ritual. The atmosphere of tension grew, but there was a glimmer of hope. We might actually rewrite our story. Later that night, as I gazed at the starry sky through the window, a mix of anxiety and anticipation settled in my heart. I went to the shelf where the book was kept, feeling the energy around me. The words written on the pages seemed to have a life of their own, and I knew that the decision we would make the next morning would change everything. And so, with the diary in hand and determination pulsing in my chest, I prepared for what lay ahead. Fate was about to be rewritten, and I couldn't let fear stop me. The air was heavy with tension when we decided to perform the ritual. The weight of responsibility on my shoulders felt almost unbearable. I, Emily, had never imagined that a book could hold so much power over our lives. But here we were, in one of the old rooms of the farmhouse, surrounded by lit candles and a circle drawn with chalk on the floor. "Are you sure this is going to work?" Sophie asked, her voice trembling as she looked at the book lying open on the table, its yellowed pages almost seeming to pulse with energy. I could see the worry in her eyes, reflecting not only the fear of the unknown but also the uncertainty about our future. "I don't know," I replied, trying to stay calm. "But we need to try. If the book has the power to foresee the future, maybe it also has the power to change it." Ethan, my younger brother, stood by my side, his gaze fixed on the book as if he could unravel its secrets just by the force of his thoughts. "I just hope this doesn't end in disaster," Ethan murmured, his words echoing in the silence of the room. He was so young, so innocent. I didn't want him to get caught up in the complications I had caused. But there was no turning back now. The book had revealed too much, and we were the only ones who could try to correct what was to come. We began to arrange the space. The candles were placed at strategic points, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The smell of melting wax mixed with that of the aged paper from the book, creating an almost sacred atmosphere. "Now, we need to recite the passage," I said, looking at the page I had found in the library, the one that spoke about the ritual. "It says we must unite our voices and intentions." Sophie stepped closer, hesitating. "What if something goes wrong? What if we can't control this?" Her doubt was palpable, but I needed her to believe. "Sophie, I know we're in a dangerous place, but this is our only chance. We need to come together and believe we can change what's written." She nodded, though her expression was still filled with uncertainty. Ethan, on the other hand, looked determined. "I trust you, Emily. Let's do this together." I felt a chill in my stomach, but also a warmth of hope. If the three of us were united, maybe we could achieve something. "Let's start," I said, taking the lead. I placed my hands on the book, feeling the texture of the paper beneath my fingers. "Repeat after me, with the strength of our voices, we change fate. May what is written become only a possibility." Sophie and Ethan joined me, and our voices echoed in the room, creating an atmosphere charged with energy. As we spoke, a strange sensation began to envelop us. The air seemed to vibrate, as if charged with an invisible electricity. The candles flickered, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. "I don't like this," Sophie said, her voice now a whisper. "What's happening?" "Don't stop," I encouraged her. "We're almost there." But as we continued reciting, a cold draft swept through the room, extinguishing one of the candles. The effect was instantaneous. The atmosphere grew tense, and a shadow seemed to emerge on the walls, as if something was about to be revealed. "Emily!" Ethan shouted, and I looked in his direction. His eyes were wide, and I followed his gaze. A nebulous figure, almost transparent, began to materialize in the corner of the room. Feeling my heart race, I stopped reciting. "What is that?" I whispered, fear swelling inside me. "Back to the book!" Sophie yelled, and we all quickly moved toward the table, seeking refuge in the pages that had brought us here. But before we could reach it, the figure advanced, and a scream echoed through the room. It was a sharp, piercing sound, as if someone were in extreme pain. "We need to get out of here." Ethan pulled my hand, but I couldn't move. What did that thing want? What did it have to do with us? I felt paralyzed, caught between fear and curiosity. What else did the book hold? "Emily, don't just stand there. Let's go!" Sophie shouted, and finally, the instinct for survival kicked in. I turned and ran toward the door, dragging Ethan and Sophie along with me. But as soon as we reached the exit, the figure dissolved into the air like smoke, and the atmosphere returned to normal, except for the heavy silence that surrounded us. "What the hell was that?" Ethan asked, breathless, as we moved away from the room. "I don't know," I replied, trying to catch my breath. "But we need to go back and find out what's happening. We can't give up now." Sophie hesitated, looking back as if expecting the figure to return. But what if it comes back? What if we just make things worse? We need to face this, I said, trying to convey confidence. If the book is really the key, we have to continue. ####, we can't let fear paralyze us. With a deep sigh, Sophie agreed. Okay, let's do this. But we need to be careful. Ethan seemed more determined than ever. We need to prepare better this time. We can't let what happened before catch us off guard again. We returned to the room, and I felt strange. What had held me back before? What did that figure want from us? The questions hammered in my mind as I looked at the book, now open to a page that seemed to glow softly. Let's try again, I suggested, placing my hands on the table. This time, we need to focus, and if something happens, we can't hesitate. Sophie and Ethan nodded, and we gathered around the book once more. I cleared my throat and began reading aloud the passage that spoke about the ritual. The words seemed to vibrate in the air, and a sense of determination began to grow inside me. With the strength of our voices, we change fate. May what is written become only a possibility. As we repeated the words, the room began to change again, and a new wave of energy enveloped us. This time, there was no fear. There was a sense of unity and purpose. The candles lit up again, and the atmosphere was filled with a soft, comforting light. I could feel that we were on the right path, that we were about to discover something important. But when the figure appeared again, it was not as threatening as before. This time, it seemed more like a familiar shadow, as if it were shaping itself from our own insecurities. I knew we couldn't stop now. We needed to face this once and for all. Let's go. I shouted, raising my voice above the figure's whisper. We are not afraid of you. We are here to change what is written. The figure hesitated, as if considering our words. I could feel the tension in the air, the energy pulsing in our circle. With one last push of courage, I shouted, "You have no power over us." And at that moment, the figure seemed to dissipate, as if a weight had been lifted from our shoulders. The silence was profound, and for a brief moment, all we could hear was the sound of our own breathing. Did we do it? Sophie asked, still in shock. I don't know, I replied, looking at the book. But I feel like we are making progress. I believe we can change our fate. And with that determination, I refocused on the book, ready to face whatever came next. The atmosphere was charged with tension as I found myself at the most difficult choice of my life. The ritual, which I believed to be the key to reversing the tragedies the book had predicted, felt more like a trap with every passing second. The scream of one of Ethan's friends still echoed in my mind, a painful reminder of what could happen if I didn't make the right decision. Emily, what are we going to do? Sophie's voice sounded nervous, almost desperate. She had tears in her eyes, and her pale face reflected the fear we all felt. I don't know, Sophie. I just wanted all of this to end, I responded, trying to stay calm, but my hands were trembling. The book, with its blank pages and disturbing revelations, seemed to be pushing me toward a bottomless abyss. We need to decide quickly, Ethan said, his voice firm despite the panic in his eyes. If we continue with the ritual, something worse might happen. But if we stop now, we will never know if we could have changed things. Sophie looked at us, indecision etched on her face. But what if the ritual actually works? What if we can change what is written? We can't just give up. Those words resonated within me. The book had shown me what could happen, but I wasn't sure if that was an inevitable fate or just a consequence of wrong choices. I remembered the last page I had read, where a blank sheet stood out, as if calling me to write my own destiny. Maybe the answer lies within us, I murmured, more to myself than to the others. I read that the power to change the future is in our hands. What does that mean if not that we can write our own story? But how do you intend to do that? Sophie looked at me with a mixture of hope and skepticism. How can you be sure it would be the right choice? I don't know, I admitted. But standing here, letting fear control us, is not an option. We can try to rewrite the ending, and if it doesn't work, at least we will know we tried. The tension in the air was palpable. The sound of distant laughter from students at school felt like a distant echo of normalcy, as if everything around us was at odds with what we were experiencing. I remembered the stories the book told, of betrayals and accidents, and what I had read about sacrifices and choices. My heart was heavy, but a new determination began to rise within me. Let's do this, I declared with conviction, feeling the words shaping into a plan. We'll perform the ritual, but instead of letting the stories dominate us, we will dominate them. Each of us can write our own ending. Ethan hesitated, but soon nodded. All right, but we need to be prepared for whatever may happen. We can't let fear paralyze us. Sophie, on the other hand, seemed relieved. That's what I wanted to hear. Let's do this together, as friends. We gathered around the circle we had formed. The book was there, open to the blank page, like an invitation. I knew that what I was about to do could change everything. Hearts racing, hands intertwined, we looked into each other's eyes, as if each of us were promising the other that we wouldn't give up. On the count of 3, let's focus on our desire to change things, I said, my voice steady. 1, 2, 3. We closed our eyes, and for a moment, the world around us seemed to disappear. A wave of energy coursed through my body, and I visualized what I wanted, a future where my brother was safe, where betrayal didn't exist, and where I could better understand my own insecurities. Write your desire, I whispered, feeling the adrenaline pulse. Write it in your heart and let it manifest. At that moment, a strong breeze arose, making the leaves of the trees outside dance as if they were preparing for a show. The environment around us seemed to vibrate, and I felt we were about to touch something deep and powerful. A vision began to form in my mind. I saw Ethan smiling, riding his bike on a sunny street, without a care in the world. I saw Sophie and me, laughing and sharing secrets, with no shadows of betrayal looming over us. It was a bright future, and the pain I felt before began to dissipate. But then, everything changed. The air around us grew dense and heavy, and the light that surrounded us began to flicker. Sophie and Ethan's voices became distant, and I found myself alone in a dark tunnel, where only the echo of my insecurities resonated. The visions of a perfect future began to distort, transforming into terrifying images, Ethan getting hurt, Sophie betraying me, everything happening right before my eyes. No. That's not what I want. I screamed, but my voice sounded like a lost whisper in the darkness. Panic began to set in again, and I felt trapped in a cycle of fear and despair. Emily. Ethan's voice cut through the silence, bringing me back to reality. What's happening? I don't know. The visions, they're changing. I looked at the book, desperate for answers. What does this mean? What are we doing wrong? We need to focus. Remember what you read, Sophie shouted, her gaze fixed on me. You said the power to change fate is in our hands. Concentrate on our friendship, on the strength we have together. I closed my eyes again, trying to block out the distorted visions. Let's unite. Our desires are stronger together. We need to believe in each other. Sophie and Ethan's hands tightened around mine, and I felt the energy flowing between us. Hashtag. I took a deep breath, trying to push away the shadows that threatened to consume me. I remembered what the book had taught me about sacrifices and choices. I decided that I would no longer be a puppet of my insecurities. I choose to trust you, I declared with strength. I choose to believe that we can change this together. Let's rewrite our story. The lights began to shine brightly, and to my surprise, the distorted visions started to dissipate, giving way to images of hope and friendship. I looked into Ethan and Sophie's eyes and saw certainty reflected in them. With a shout of determination, we united in a single desire, one common goal, to change our destiny, not just for ourselves but for everyone around us. It was in that moment that I realized true strength didn't lie solely in the words the book offered us, but in the connection we had with one another. We were more than characters in a story, we were authors of our own lives, and together we could write an ending that reflected who we truly were. And so, with energy pulsating through our veins and our hearts beating in unison, we began to rewrite the ending of the story. The air was heavy in the empty classroom, and the smell of aged paper mingled with the sweat of the tension surrounding us. I looked at my friends' faces, each reflecting a whirlwind of emotions. What should have been a moment of unity had turned into a battlefield of emotions. Sophie stood with her arms crossed, her eyes, once filled with laughter and secrets, now dark and challenging. Ethan, on the other hand, looked lost, a worried expression on his youthful face. "We need to talk about what's happening," I started, my voice sounding weaker than I would have liked. "The book, the stories, all of this could change our future, and we need to decide what to do." "Decide? You mean we need to decide who's going to get hurt next?" Sophie shot back, her voice sharp as glass. "What you read changed everything, Emily. You can't just ignore it." "I'm not ignoring it. But we can't just let fear control us," I replied, feeling frustration swell within me. "We need to face this together." Ethan, who had been silent until then, interrupted, "But what if what you read is true? What if Sophie's betrayal is really happening? What do we do about it? How can we protect ourselves?" "I never thought you could doubt me, Ethan," Sophie yelled, her eyes shining with tears. "I'm your friend. How can you think I would do something like that?" "I'm not saying that," he replied, raising his voice. "But we need to be realistic. The book, it's changing everything. I can't just stand here and ignore what might happen." The argument was escalating to a boiling point. The environment, once familiar and safe, now felt claustrophobic. The walls seemed to close in on us as words became sharp weapons. I looked at Sophie, trying to find a way to calm her down. "Sophie, I trust you. But we need to be honest. What do you think is happening? Do you have something to tell me?" I knew something was wrong, something hidden beneath the surface of our friendship. She hesitated, her lips moving but without sound. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire, ready to snap. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. I don't know what you read. But I need you to trust me. I would never do anything to hurt you." "I want to believe that, but the book doesn't lie," I said, trying to keep calm. "It can't lie, and every page I saw hit me like a blow to the heart. I don't want you to be the villain in my story." She turned away, her eyes filled with pain and defiance. "And what if I'm not the villain, Emily? What if you are for not trusting me?" Those words hit me like a punch to the stomach. What was I doing? I was so consumed by fear that I didn't realize how it was pushing us apart. I looked at Ethan, who was watching the argument with a worried expression. What could I do to restore trust between us? "We need to work together," I said, my voice softer now. "The book can't control us. We need to find a way to change this. Together. If Sophie's betrayal is really happening, we need to find out. But we can't let this tear us apart." Sophie's eyes sparkled with a mix of anger and sadness, but she didn't respond. The air was thick between us, and the tension was palpable. I knew time was passing, and uncertainty was consuming us. "If we're going to do this, we need to be transparent," I suggested, taking a deep breath. "Let's gather and share everything we know about the book. About what we read. About everything." "You're right," Ethan agreed, breaking the silence. "We can't hide anything. If we want to move forward, we need to face this head-on." Sophie looked between us, assessing the situation. Finally, she nodded, but her gaze still held distrust. "All right. Let's do this. But we need to promise to be honest. If there's something we're not saying, we need to say it. The atmosphere in the room shifted, and a new sense of determination began to emerge. It was time to face whatever lay ahead, and I was willing to fight for our friendship. Together, as we always should have been. Then let's meet tomorrow afternoon at the park, I proposed. It's a quieter place. We can discuss everything without interruptions. I agree, Ethan said, his expression finally relaxing. We need a safe space to talk. Sophie was still hesitant but nodded, as if accepting the proposal. All right. I hope this works. The next morning, the atmosphere in the park was lighter. The sun shone brightly, and the gentle breeze carried the fresh scent of cut grass. My friends and I met under a large tree, a refuge near the lake. The setting was perfect for a difficult but necessary conversation. Are you ready for this? I began, looking from one to the other. We need to be honest about what we read. And how it affected us. Ethan was the first to speak. I read about the accident. About how you, Emily, tried to warn us but couldn't. What scared me the most was thinking I could be in danger. It made me so anxious that I couldn't think of anything else. I felt that way too, Sophie said, looking at the ground. But the hardest part was reading about the betrayal. I never wanted you to feel that way, Emily. I was so worried about protecting you that I ended up pulling away. I understand, I replied, my heart tightening as I heard her words. But I was scared too. Scared of losing both of you. The book didn't just predict what could happen, it made me question who I really am. I don't want this to tear us apart, Ethan said, his voice firm. Friendship is more important than any story. We can't let fear control us. Sophie lifted her eyes, and I saw determination growing within her. Then let's unite against it. If the book is changing our lives, we need to find a way to rewrite the story. We can't let it define us. I agree, I said, feeling a wave of hope. We need to learn more about the author. If he really could alter fate, maybe there's a way to reverse this. And so we began to discuss ways to investigate the origin of the book and the stories it contained. With each exchanged word, the tension that had separated us started to dissipate. Our voices united, forming a plan to confront the unknown. As the conversation flowed, each of us began to share our insecurities and fears. I spoke about my internal struggle, how the book had revealed parts of myself I didn't want to face. Sophie, in turn, admitted her own shortcomings and how her desire to protect our friendship had led her to act selfishly. I just want us to be happy, she said, tears in her eyes. I don't want anything to come between us. Friendship means everything to me. Me too, Ethan added. And that's what we need to remember. Hashtag, it doesn't matter what the book says, we are the ones who control our lives. With those words, the atmosphere shifted. The sun began to shine more brightly, as if celebrating the rebirth of our friendship. In that moment, I realized that, no matter what the future held for us, we were not alone. We were together, facing the unknown, and that was all that mattered. Uncertain of what would happen next, we were ready to confront whatever the book might throw our way. And, more importantly, we were prepared to care for one another. Friendship, after all, was the true story we needed to write. The air was heavy, almost oppressive, as I looked at the book that had changed everything. The pages lay open on the table, and a deafening silence filled the room. I had just discovered that the person who wrote those terrifying stories was, in some way, a distorted version of myself. The author was not a stranger, he was a reflection of my fears and insecurities, an echo of my internal struggles. This can't be true, I murmured, more to myself than to the others in the room. The tension was palpable, and I could feel the anxiety pulsating around me. Sophie and Ethan stood beside me, both wearing expressions of confusion and apprehension, but also of hope. What I was about to say could change everything. Emily, what are you thinking? Sophie asked, breaking the silence. Her gaze was intense, and I knew she was waiting for a response that might ease her doubts. I took a deep breath, trying to organize the thoughts that felt like a tangled mess in my mind. I realized that the author, he was me, I began, my voice trembling. He wasn't just writing about our lives, he was writing about me, about my insecurities, about the fear I felt of losing you, of not being enough. Ethan furrowed his brow. But that means everything we read was just a projection of what you fear. How can that be? He looked lost, and I couldn't blame him. It was an overwhelming revelation. Yes. Every betrayal, every accident, every misunderstanding, all of it was a distorted version of what I feared could happen. I was so focused on protecting you and myself that I let those fears transform into something real and threatening. The author was a version of me who got lost in her own stories, and now I need to rewrite that. Silence reigned again as the words hung in the air. The idea that I had the power to change the narrative was staggering. But how? How could I untie the knots I had created myself? And if it doesn't work? What if you rewrite it and things get worse? Sophie questioned, concern evident in her tone. I could see she was grappling with her own insecurities. It might be risky, but I can't just stand here waiting for what I fear to become reality, I replied firmly. I need to do this. Ethan's encouraging look gave me a boost of courage. We can do this together. As I looked at the book, a blank page appeared before me, a silent invitation to rewrite the ending. My heart raced. It was the chance I needed. Let's do this. Let's come together and write a new story. I said, a spark of determination in my eyes. Let's free ourselves from what binds us. Sophie and Ethan exchanged glances, and I could see understanding forming on their faces. Okay, Sophie finally said, her voice soft. Let's do this. We're in this together, Emily. With an encouraging smile, I looked at the book once more. I'll start. I placed the pen on the blank page and, with a firm stroke, wrote, Emily, Sophie, and Ethan overcome their fears and become stronger together. As I wrote, the words began to glow, and a wave of energy swept through the room. I could feel the old stories fading away, like a distant echo, as new possibilities emerged before us. Look! Ethan exclaimed, pointing to the book. The pages began to turn on their own, and images and words started to form. I saw visions of the three of us together, laughing, overcoming challenges, supporting each other in tough times. This is amazing! Sophie said, tears of emotion in her eyes. We're doing it. But then, a shadow passed over me, like a reminder of what was still at stake. What if this isn't enough? I asked, doubt creeping into my mind. What if the consequences are worse than we imagined? We can't let fear control us, Ethan replied, his voice steady. You've already faced your fears, Emily. Now is the time to show that we are stronger than they are. With that, I turned my gaze back to the book. The pages were now alive, narrating a new story. A story of friendship, resilience, and love. But then, one last vision hit me, the author of the book, watching from afar. I saw him, a man shrouded in mist, his eyes fixed on me. You've always been here, I said, unsure if he could hear. You're not just the author, you're part of me. I'm ready to embrace every part of myself, every insecurity, and turn them into strength. A message appeared on the last page, written in a familiar handwriting. The true story has always been about overcoming your fears. Every challenge is an opportunity to reinvent yourself. Don't be afraid to accept yourself, Emily. Tears streamed down my face as I read those words. I was not alone. The author was a part of me, a reflection of my struggles, but now I understood. I had the power to change the narrative, not just in the book, but in my life. Let's move forward together, I said, turning to Sophie and Ethan. We need to live this new story. We need to be the protagonists of our lives, unafraid of what might happen. With a nod, They agreed, and together, we embraced tightly. The book now glowed brightly, and the energy radiating from it was comforting. We were ready to face whatever came our way, and the new story we were about to live was ours to write. As the light from the book enveloped the room, I realized that true power lay in acceptance, in facing fears, and in transforming pain into strength. I would no longer be a prisoner of my insecurities. I was Emily, and this was my story. And so, with one last look at the book, with the certainty that everything I needed was already within me, I left the past behind and embraced a future full of possibilities.